There is a principle, both ancient and deeply spiritual, that speaks to the power of names. To name something is to define it, to call it out, to separate it from the shadows and bring it into the light. And until that happens, it holds power over you. You cannot cast a demon out that is nameless, not because the demon is too strong, but because it is still hidden. It is still wrapped in ambiguity, in silence, in denial. Think of the battles we fight internally. Fear, shame, addiction, rage, anxiety. These aren't just feelings. Sometimes they grow into forces that control us, patterns that we fall into again and again, and as long as we pretend they don't exist, as long as we don't call them by their name, we remain trapped. You can't break free from what you won't confront, and you can't confront what you won't acknowledge. Naming the demon is the first act of courage. It is saying, I see you. I know what you are. You are not just something I'm going through. You are insecurity. You are the trauma from my childhood. You are the addiction I keep minimizing. You are the bitterness I hold on to because forgiveness feels too hard. Naming doesn't mean we are defeated. It means we are ready to fight. Every major transformation in life begins with recognition. Recovery starts when someone says, I am an addict. Healing begins when someone admits, I am hurting. Reconciliation starts when we confess, I was wrong. The truth, though painful, sets us free. But only the truth we are willing to speak. There is no power in vague prayers. There is no breakthrough in generalized denial. A demon thrives in the silence we give it. It grows stronger in the rooms we keep locked, in the names we're too afraid to say. And yet, once named, once exposed, its power begins to wither. Because when we name a thing, we reclaim authority over it. This is not just about spiritual warfare, it's about honesty. It's about facing ourselves with brutal clarity. We live in a world that tells us to hide, to perform, to suppress what makes us uncomfortable. But the truth is, you cannot heal what you refuse to admit is broken. You cannot break free from chains you insist aren't there. So the question becomes, what are the nameless demons in your life? What have you been avoiding, denying, spiritualizing away instead of confronting? Is it fear of failure? Is it the anger that's been passed down for generations? Is it the quiet despair that you dress up every day and smile through? Until you name it, you cannot cast it out. Until you name it, it stays. So today, let this be an invitation, not to shame, but to courage. Name it, face it, and then, with everything in you, cast it out. Because the light will always overcome the darkness, but first you have to let the light in. Naming brings power and clarity. This truth is often underestimated, but it is at the heart of every real breakthrough, emotional, spiritual, or psychological. A name defines. A name identifies. It draws boundaries around something that was previously formless, giving it shape, giving it form, and most importantly, making it visible. Without a name, a problem remains blurry. Without a name, a struggle remains ambiguous, and anything ambiguous can't be fought directly, because you can't fight what you cannot see. Many people live for years battling emotions, habits, or spiritual oppression without ever stopping to name what they're dealing with. They feel the weight of something heavy in their minds. They sense something dark in their hearts, but they avoid calling it what it is. Sometimes it's fear, sometimes pride, sometimes shame. Often it's trauma that has never been addressed or addiction that has been minimized. It could be depression dressed up as fatigue or jealousy hidden behind sarcasm. Whatever it is, when it has no name, it operates unchecked. It works in the shadows, weaving through thoughts, shaping behavior, and stealing peace. The longer it remains unnamed, the more power it gathers, not because it's growing stronger, but because we remain unarmed to deal with it. Naming the issue is the first act of war. It's the moment you stop running and face the thing that's been chasing you. It is the light switch in a dark room. It may not clean the room instantly, but now you can finally see the mess, and when you can see it, you can start to deal with it. Without clarity, we remain confused. We end up addressing symptoms rather than causes. We medicate pain without understanding its source. We numb ourselves through distractions, addictions, or even false spiritual performances instead of confronting the root. There is incredible power in a name. In ancient traditions, to know the name of something was to have authority over it. Even in many spiritual practices, the act of naming a spirit, an affliction, or an inner wound is central to healing. Why? Because when you name something, you take responsibility for it. You are no longer a passive victim. You are now engaged, aware, and positioned to confront it head-on. You move from confusion to direction, from powerlessness to strategy, from isolation to connection. Because once you can name it, you can explain it to others, seek help, and build language around your experience. The danger of the nameless demon is that it becomes part of your identity without your consent. It whispers lies, masks itself as personality traits or fate, and tells you this is just how things are. You begin to believe that the anxiety you've always felt is just part of your nature, or that the bitterness you carry is just part of your story. But when you name it, really name it, you begin to separate yourself from it. You stop owning it as who I am and start recognizing it as what I'm battling. That distinction is the birthplace of deliverance. Because what is named can be fought. What is fought can be overcome. And what is overcome loses its grip on your life. Naming is not about wallowing in negativity. It is not about labeling yourself with despair. It's about truth. It's about honesty. It's about shining light in places where darkness has been hiding for too long. Denial is comfortable, but it is also a prison. Naming something, whether it's fear, trauma, envy, or even a spirit of oppression, is how you unlock the door. It's also important to understand that naming often comes with pain, because to name something means you must look at it. You must sit with it long enough to understand what it really is, and that process is not easy. It may mean revisiting painful memories, confronting patterns of behavior, or acknowledging things you've buried for years. But this pain is not destructive. It is surgical. It is the pain of healing, not the pain of dying. When you name something, you also remove its mystique. Many struggles keep us bound because they seem too big, too overwhelming, too mysterious. But a name reduces a giant to size. When David faced Goliath, he didn't just see a warrior, he saw an uncircumcised Philistine defying the living God. He named his enemy, and in doing so redefined the battle. The same applies to us. When we name our internal enemies, we reclaim the ability to fight from a place of truth. In life, clarity is everything, and clarity starts with naming. You cannot move forward with a struggle you're still pretending doesn't exist. You can't heal from what you refuse to admit is broken, and you cannot cast out what remains unnamed. So if you are in a season of unrest, if you feel stuck, overwhelmed, or spiritually stagnant, ask yourself, what have I not named yet? What am I afraid to face? Because once you name it, you begin to own your story. And once you own your story, you take the first step toward freedom. Silence and denial give darkness strength. This may not be a comfortable truth, but it is a necessary one. The things we refuse to face, the pain we pretend isn't there, the battles we fight only in our minds, these things don't go away because we ignore them. In fact, they grow. Hidden or unnamed struggles fester in silence. Silence is not neutral. It may feel like a form of peace or control, but it is often the very thing that allows what's hurting us to stay alive, undisturbed and unchallenged. Many people carry hidden wounds, silent fears and unspoken addictions. They walk around looking whole on the outside but feel broken on the inside, and because no one sees it, they convince themselves it isn't real, or at least not serious. But silence doesn't equal healing. Denial doesn't equal strength. There is no freedom in pretending. What is unspoken remains unhealed. What is hidden remains unchallenged. And whatever remains unchallenged eventually takes control. Darkness thrives in silence. It feeds on secrecy. It multiplies in the dark corners of our minds and hearts where truth has been shut out. You may think that hiding something protects you or protects others, but more often it isolates you, and isolation is where lies become louder. In silence, that voice in your head tells you you're alone, that no one would understand, that it's too late. But those are lies designed to keep you bound. And the longer you believe them, the more strength they gather. Denial doesn't make a problem disappear. It only makes it harder to reach. The longer we deny something exists, the more time it has to entrench itself in our identity. We start shaping our habits around the thing we refuse to acknowledge. We develop coping mechanisms. We build routines that help us manage rather than heal. And all the while, the struggle becomes more deeply rooted. What started as a reaction becomes a pattern. What started as a moment becomes a mindset. And what started as a wound becomes a way of life. People often stay silent out of fear. Fear of judgment, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as weak or broken. But the irony is that by staying silent, we become more vulnerable to exactly what we're afraid of. Because silence doesn't stop pain from leaking out. It shows up in how we treat people, how we handle stress, how we trust, how we make decisions. It shows up in our relationships, in our health, in our inability to rest. You can't bury something alive and expect it to stay still. If you bury shame, it will rise as anger. If you bury trauma, it will rise as anxiety. If you bury sin, it will rise as guilt that eats away at your confidence and peace. There is no safety in silence. It feels safe because it protects you from the discomfort of exposure, but it also protects the very thing that's hurting you. It keeps it alive and untouched. And every day it remains hidden. It becomes more normalized. It becomes harder to see it as a problem because you've learned how to live with it. That's the deception of denial. You stop expecting freedom and start settling for survival. True healing requires honesty. Not shallow honesty, but the kind that makes you uncomfortable. The kind that forces you to say out loud, "This is what I've been carrying." That moment is not weakness, it's strength. It's strength because you are no longer giving silence the final word. You are choosing light over darkness. You are choosing growth over stagnation. And growth always starts with truth. There's a reason why some people can pray, attend services, even serve others, and still feel spiritually stuck. It's not because God is far from them. It's often because they're still keeping things in the dark. God doesn't bless who you pretend to be. He meets you where you really are, and to meet you there, you have to be willing to admit where there is. That takes vulnerability. It takes courage, but it's also the only road to real deliverance. We need to understand that silence isn't just a lack of noise. It's a posture, a closed-off heart, a mind that avoids, a refusal to speak truthfully, even to oneself. And when that posture becomes a way of life, it becomes a prison. It keeps the struggle alive and keeps the help out. The moment you break that silence, you break the cycle. The moment you speak, even in a whisper, "This is what I'm dealing with," you start reclaiming your power, because what you expose can be healed. What you confront can be changed. What you confess can be forgiven. But you cannot fight what you're unwilling to name, and you cannot name what you've kept silent. Denial is a delay tactic. It may buy you time, but it will cost you peace. It may numb you temporarily, but it will never make you whole. If you want true freedom, you have to be willing to break the silence. You have to name the pain, the fear, the struggle, and bring it into the light. Darkness loses its grip when the truth is spoken. Chains begin to break the moment you say, "I've been silent long enough." That is the beginning of deliverance. That is the beginning of healing. And that is where the power of God and the strength of your own voice begin to work together. Breaking the silence, breaking the chains, and breaking the darkness. Honest acknowledgement initiates freedom. This simple truth carries more power than most people realize. In a world where image is often valued more than integrity, and where many have been conditioned to hide their struggles behind polite smiles and social performance, honesty can feel dangerous. But it is not dangerous. It is deliverance. True healing does not begin in hiding, pretending, or suppressing. It begins the moment you stop lying to yourself. It begins the moment you admit what is really going on inside of you. The moment you name what you've been running from and say it out loud, even if it scares you. When we are honest with ourselves, we take the first and most essential step toward healing. You cannot be healed from what you will not admit is hurting you. You cannot be delivered from what you refuse to confess has control over you. As long as you remain in denial or silence, you're not dealing with reality. you're dealing with an illusion. And illusions, no matter how comforting, will never set you free. Only truth can do that. There is something deeply spiritual about confession, not just in the religious sense, but in the human sense. When you speak the truth out loud, especially the hard truth, something shifts. There's a release, a breaking of false identities and internal prisons. You stop being defined by secrecy and shame. You start being defined by truth, and truth is always the first key to freedom. It breaks the agreement you made with fear. It challenges the voice of shame that told you if they knew this about you, they'd walk away. It silences the lie that said, you're the only one dealing with this. The truth doesn't make your pain disappear instantly, but it does cut through the fog. It gives you a place to begin. Naming the demon, whether that demon is fear, addiction, bitterness, lust, insecurity, depression, or anything else, is not about giving it more power. It's about removing its disguise. As long as it remains unnamed, it can operate freely, whispering lies into your mind, influencing your choices, and convincing you that this is just who you are. But once you name it, you confront it, you separate yourself from it, you expose it. And what is exposed begins to lose power. You cannot conquer what you continue to coddle. You cannot be free from what you continue to justify or downplay. There is courage in saying, this is where I'm broken. There is strength in confessing, this is where I've failed. That kind of honesty may feel like weakness in the moment, but it is the beginning of real strength, the kind that leads to transformation. It is only when you reach the end of pretending that you find the beginning of peace. Because as long as you're pretending, you're performing. And as long as you're performing, you're not resting. You're not being. You're surviving. Freedom isn't just about escaping something. It's about becoming someone new. And that becoming begins with acknowledgement. You don't just wake up one day healed from a lifetime of wounds. Healing is a process, and that process starts the moment you choose to tell the truth. You speak it, you feel it, you name it. And then you begin the work of walking through it with clarity and intention. This applies not just to personal struggles, but also to generational ones. Some people are bound by patterns they didn't start. They are trapped in cycles passed down to them. Anger, abuse, dysfunction, secrecy. And until someone stands up and says, this has been in my family for too long, and it stops with me, the pattern continues. But acknowledgement breaks the silence. It breaks the inheritance. It says, I see it for what it is, and I will not let it rule my life anymore. That's how generational freedom begins, with someone who has the courage to be honest. The reason many never experience deep healing is not because healing isn't available, but because honesty isn't embraced. We prefer polished over real, comfort over truth, but truth will always outlast comfort, and reality will always break through the mask, eventually. The longer you avoid honesty, the longer you delay your healing. It's not that you can't be free, it's that you haven't chosen to face what's really going on. And the beautiful thing is that once you speak the truth, you often find you are not alone. Others are walking through the same shadows, carrying the same weight, needing the same grace. But someone has to go first. Someone has to say the hard thing. someone has to break the silence with truth. Honest acknowledgement doesn't mean you have all the answers. It doesn't mean you instantly overcome everything. It simply means you're willing to stop running. You're willing to stand in the light. And that willingness opens doors. It opens your heart to healing. It opens your mind to clarity. It opens your spirit to the possibility of peace that you haven't felt in years. You don't have to have it all figured out to start healing. You just have to be honest. That's where freedom begins. Not in perfection, not in pretending, but in truth. And the truth, spoken in humility and courage, is powerful enough to begin changing everything. Transformation requires specific confrontation. This is a principle that applies not just spiritually, but in every area of life: mental, emotional, relational. Change doesn't happen by accident, and healing doesn't come by hoping things will somehow get better without ever naming what's wrong. It's not enough to acknowledge that something is off or to vaguely pray for peace or strength. Real transformation, the kind that shifts the course of a person's life, only comes when the exact nature of the problem is recognized, named, and directly confronted. We live in a world that often chooses comfort over clarity. People prefer to pray general prayers, make broad statements, and use soft language around hard problems. It feels safer. It's easier to say, "I'm struggling," than it is to say, "I'm battling lust," or "I'm filled with resentment," or "I'm addicted to validation." But healing doesn't happen in generalities. Breakthrough doesn't occur through avoidance. A wound that isn't cleaned out specifically will not heal properly. In fact, it can worsen beneath the surface, even when the outside looks fine. The same is true with spiritual and emotional wounds. You cannot cast out what you will not confront, and you cannot confront what you refuse to define. You might know something is hurting you, weakening you, or holding you back, but until you decide to face it directly and call it by name, it stays embedded in your life. You end up praying the same prayers, circling the same problems, repeating the same behaviors. There's movement, but no progress. There's effort, but no change. That's what happens when we deal with life in generalities instead of specifics. Specific confrontation requires honesty and courage. It means being willing to look at your pain or pattern and stop calling it by a softer name. It means you stop spiritualizing dysfunction or rationalizing poor choices and begin facing the truth of what's going on inside. It's one thing to say you're in a dry season and another to say you've lost the discipline of prayer or have been avoiding God out of guilt. It's one thing to say you're just tired and another to admit you're numb, disconnected, or falling into depression. But only one of those admissions opens the door to real healing. This kind of confrontation is not about condemnation. It's about clarity. You cannot fix what you won't face. You cannot overcome what you keep protecting. Often we think avoiding a painful truth is helping us cope, but avoidance only strengthens what we're running from. The longer you allow it to remain unchallenged, the more space it occupies in your life. And what occupies your life starts shaping your thoughts, your decisions, your relationships. That's how strongholds form, not because the issue is unbeatable, but because it remains unaddressed. God does not respond to vague desperation. He responds to faith-filled honesty. When blind Bartimaeus cried out to Jesus, he didn't say, "Help me with everything I'm going through." He said, "I want to see." That was a specific request. That was a direct confrontation with his need. And Jesus responded. The same pattern appears throughout Scripture. People who were willing to bring their exact issue to God saw real change. The woman with the issue of blood didn't hope for general healing. She reached for the hem of his garment with focused, specific faith. Transformation met her at the point of her specific desperation. Many people settle for temporary relief because they're unwilling to engage in specific confrontation. They want peace without process. They want healing without exposure. But that's not how lasting change happens. If you want to be free from the root, not just the fruit, you must dig deep and deal with it clearly. What is it exactly that is holding you back? What mindset, memory, sin, or stronghold continues to cycle through your life? You cannot kill what you will not identify. You cannot change what you continue to excuse. There is a difference between managing pain and confronting the source of it. Many people learn to manage their dysfunction. They adjust their lives around it, compensate for it, normalize it. But management isn't transformation, it's survival. And you were not made just to survive. You were made to be whole. You were made to walk in clarity and strength. But clarity begins with confrontation. Transformation is a choice. It starts with a decision to face what you've been avoiding. It continues with naming that thing, speaking it out, and asking for help if needed. It's a process, yes, but it's a process that begins with a specific step, not a vague hope, not a generalized desire, a focused, honest, and direct confrontation with what is real. You may have prayed for years about the same situation, wondering why nothing has changed. The problem may not be the prayer. It may be the lack of precision. You're asking for freedom, but haven't named the thing keeping you bound. You're asking for healing, but haven't admitted where the wound really is. You're asking for peace, but haven't confronted the source of the chaos. The good news is, it's never too late to get specific. It's never too late to stop hiding behind vague language and finally face what's really been controlling you. When you do, you'll find that what once seemed so strong begins to lose its grip, because the light of truth exposes darkness, the clarity of honesty breaks confusion, and the courage to confront brings the strength to transform. Naming reclaims authority. That simple act, often overlooked or dismissed as symbolic, holds deep spiritual and psychological power. When something is named, truly and accurately named, it is brought out of the shadows and into the light. It no longer hides in confusion or masquerades as something else. It becomes identifiable, traceable, and most importantly, confrontable. Once a demon is named, its hold begins to break. Not because the act of naming is magic, but because it is the first decisive step in reclaiming dominion over something that once dominated you. People often live under oppression, not because they lack strength, but because they lack clarity. They move through life feeling stuck, confused, reactive, overwhelmed, and yet unable to put a finger on exactly why. This lack of clarity creates an internal imbalance, a sense of powerlessness. You can't fight fog. You can't take dominion over what you can't even define. But when you stop and give that struggle a name, when you call it what it is, everything begins to shift. You move from being passively affected to actively engaged. You move from victimhood to leadership over your own mind, heart, and spirit. Naming changes your posture. When you're afraid to name what's been tormenting you, you remain in a defensive position. You're constantly reacting, coping, trying to manage something that seems bigger than you. But the moment you say, "This is what it is," you shift into an offensive position. Now you are choosing to face it, choosing to call it out, choosing to no longer hide from it or let it hide from you. You're no longer just surviving the impact, you're challenging the source. Naming something does not mean you have all the answers. It doesn't mean you're instantly free, but it means you've stopped agreeing with silence. It means you've stopped protecting the thing that's been defeating you. It may be fear that's been shaping your decisions. It may be rejection that's followed you for years. It may be pride that's disguised itself as independence. Whatever it is, when you name it, you begin the process of dismantling its influence over your life. You stop making space for it. You stop letting it speak into your identity. You begin to take your voice back. Authority is always tied to awareness. You cannot operate in authority over something you're unaware of. In the same way that doctors need a diagnosis to treat a disease, we need spiritual and emotional diagnoses to address our internal battles. A misdiagnosed problem is a problem that cannot be healed properly. And many people are spiritually frustrated, not because God is absent, but because they've never named what's really at work within them. They feel tormented, but haven't defined the tormentor. They feel anxious, but haven't acknowledged the root. They're trying to win a war without understanding who the enemy really is. Naming also breaks agreement. When something is unnamed, it blends into your life. It becomes part of the background. It makes itself familiar. But naming it disrupts that agreement. It's like drawing a line and saying, "You are not welcome here anymore." It is an act of reclaiming space, mental space, emotional space, relational space, even spiritual space. It sends a message not only to the thing you're confronting, but also to your own soul. I am no longer under this. I am above it. I have the right to confront it, cast it out, and walk free from it. This applies to every area of life: addictions, toxic mindsets, spiritual oppression, trauma, sin. When left unnamed, these things wear you down, subtly, invisibly. They influence how you speak, how you think, how you relate to others, even how you see God. But when named, their power begins to fade, because now you can develop a strategy. Now you can seek the right help. Now you can pray specific prayers. Now you can hold yourself accountable to change. Authority is not loud, it's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's as quiet as a whisper that says, "This ends now." But that whisper is only possible once the truth is fully acknowledged. That truth might hurt at first. It might challenge everything you've used to cope, but truth is never your enemy. It is the key that unlocks the prison door. And naming is one of the most powerful expressions of truth. You are not called to live under oppression. You are not designed to walk through life afraid of your own struggles. You were created with the authority to overcome, to stand firm, and to walk in freedom. But authority is not automatic. it must be activation. And activation begins with identification. This is why naming is so important. It is not a small thing. It is a bold, declarative step toward taking your life back. The process might be uncomfortable. It might bring tears. It might uncover wounds you thought were gone. But the pain of exposure is far better than the pain of bondage. When you name the thing, you remove its ability to hide in your mind and soul. You remove its mask, and once unmasked, it loses the ability to manipulate you. So if you feel stuck, start by asking the hard questions. What is it, really, that's keeping you in this place? What have you avoided naming because it felt too scary, too deep, too painful? And then when you find it, speak it, not to shame yourself, but to free yourself, because once it's named, it can no longer define you. You take your authority back, one name at a time. Courage is required to name the demon. It is not a simple or passive act. It is not a routine part of reflection or just another item on a list of spiritual disciplines. It is a bold and risky confrontation with truth. To name the thing that has been tormenting you, influencing your decisions, clouding your thoughts, or pulling you backward, takes real bravery. It is one of the most powerful and terrifying things a person can do, not because the act itself is complicated, but because of what it forces us to face. Looking within is never easy, especially when what waits to be discovered isn't something we're proud of. Most people avoid this kind of deep inspection, not because they lack intelligence or even faith, but because they're afraid of what they might find. It's easier to focus on external problems, to point to circumstances or the behavior of others, than to admit something is wrong inside me. It's easier to pray general prayers than to face the specific truth that we might be carrying bitterness, that we might be addicted to people's approval, that we might be ruled by pride, lust, fear, or insecurity. And yet, until we name it, we remain under its influence. It continues to shape our responses, distort our perspective, and delay our healing. Naming is not defeat. It is the beginning of victory. It is the declaration that says, I will no longer be ruled by what I refuse to acknowledge. It is the first step toward deliverance, because deliverance cannot begin where denial still reigns. There is no breakthrough in pretending. There is no freedom in vague language. You cannot be free from a demon you won't admit is present. You cannot cast out what you refuse to see. This is why courage is essential. It's not just about naming a behavior or emotion. It's about being willing to expose what has been kept hidden in the darkest places of the heart. Sometimes what we have to name is something that started years ago. Wounds from childhood, betrayal, abuse, patterns inherited from generations before us. Sometimes it's our own sin. Things we chose, things we justified, things we're ashamed to admit. Other times, it's a deep fear we've masked with strength, a sadness we've disguised with sarcasm, or a loneliness we've tried to drown in distraction. To name these things is to face them head on, and to face them takes incredible courage. But here is the irony. While naming feels like a terrifying loss of control, it is actually the very act that restores control. When you name the demon, you bring it into the light, and what enters the light begins to lose its power. The silence is broken, the shame is interrupted, the lies lose their footing. You stop running from yourself, and you stop hiding from God. You meet truth face to face, and while that moment may break you open, it also makes you whole. People think of courage as something loud, visible, heroic. But often the most courageous act is done in quiet, private moments when no one else is watching. It's when you kneel down and whisper the truth you've been avoiding. It's when you finally say, "This is what I'm struggling with," not to excuse it, but to confront it. It's when you stop pretending and admit that you need help. That is real courage. That is where transformation begins. Naming also demands that we stop blaming. As long as we externalize everything, blaming our past, other people, our situation, we avoid responsibility. But naming shifts the focus from what's happening to us to what's happening in us. It forces us to own the space we've given to the struggle. That doesn't mean taking on guilt that isn't ours, especially in cases of trauma or abuse. It means recognizing that even if we didn't choose the wound, we are responsible for what we do with it now. And that responsibility is empowering. It means we are not helpless. We are not doomed. We can choose to confront, to heal, to grow. Naming is not about wallowing in brokenness. It's about interrupting the cycle. It's about saying this has gone on long enough, and even if it's been with you for years, even if it's become part of your identity, it doesn't have to stay. But it won't leave until it's addressed directly. Vague prayers won't move what's deeply rooted. Broad declarations won't dismantle what's been fortified over time. Only specific, courageous confrontation can do that. It's important to remember that naming is not a one-time act of bravery. It is often a process. You may name one layer and later uncover another. Healing happens in stages, and each stage requires a new level of honesty. But each time you choose to speak truth, to face the demon rather than flee, you gain ground. You become stronger. You begin to walk in the authority that comes from knowing who you are and what no longer has the right to stay in your life. So the question is not, is there something wrong with me? The real question is, do I have the courage to name what's trying to control me? Because once it's named, it's exposed. And once it's exposed, it's on notice. You are no longer the one being chased. You become the one doing the confronting. That shift in power begins with one simple act, naming the thing. And though it may take all the courage you have, it is the most freeing, powerful, and transformative thing you will ever do.